Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I was in for a special treat as I met with Anne Collier, Executive Coach and CEO of Arudia, at the exclusive Georgetown Club in Washington, D.C. Anne and I have met there before, and it was one of my favorite places to eat, enjoy an old-fashioned, and imagine all the important business and political deals that go down there every day. In this episode, we discuss her career, starting as a tax lawyer and transitioning into her true calling of helping others succeed. Today will be very helpful for anyone that is considered getting professional coaching or interested in the process and tools used to take your career and relationships to the next level. I hope you enjoy. Hey, good afternoon, Anne. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm doing very good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Anne, you and I have been really had a relationship for probably almost 4 or 5 years. We had some mutual friends in the corporate world that definitely got us connected. And, one big part of my show from an meritocracy perspective is, it's never a bad thing to ask for help in trying to find your way through things. I've had spiritual leaders on from a perspective, not just Christianity, but anything that's higher power. Being able to help with different parts of things that are of interest. But this show for me is very special because having the opportunity at certain points in my career, you really were instrumental as an executive coach. And I'm super glad to have you on. And first of all, today we're sitting here in the Georgetown Club, Washington, D.C., and I'm super excited to be here. We've had lunches here a couple times. And for the listeners, just to kind of give them an idea, can you talk a little bit about this club? And I know you have a role here too.
Sure. So the club was founded in 1966, which was the year I was born, but don't tell anybody, to bring people together, people that were involved in politics, the government, socialites, which sounds like such a dated term, business people, but bring people together and create a sense of community. It's also a very special place to me because it's where my husband and I were married 20 years ago, so this is our anniversary year.
Congratulations.
So it's very exciting. And I'm on the board, so have been able to help steer the club over the last 6 years.
When you come into this beautiful building here in Georgetown, it reeks of history. It really has that feel of the kind of where it looks like a place where deals could have been made.
Deals were definitely made. In fact, I'll have to show you some of the wonderful architectural salvage work that's been done. The paneling in the living room is from a Welsh castle.
Wow.
And there are some things from J.P. Morgan building, the ship that's in the main dining room. Yep. So there's all sorts of neat little pieces. And last week we hosted a college reunion in one of the rooms. So it's a wonderful place.
It's awesome. And with our connection, and I'll just kind of butt up to kind of from my perspective, but you and I, like I said, we're introduced to through a common friend. I'd say that our relationship really kind of picked up when I was getting ready to transition into government. And, you go into public service and you say, hey, look, I want to try and do the best I can do. You've got something that, regardless of what party you are, political aspiration you have, it's, it's public service, and but the job was a big one, and it was, getting ready to take over to be the CFO for DHS with $90 billion budget, 250,000 people. And I wanted to make sure that not only could I bring the technical expertise, but I really wanted to be able to do the best job I could. And I turned to you as an executive coach to kind of get me ready. And I think, what was really helpful for me was it wasn't just a great discussion. Something that I uncovered, because I've dealt with different executive coaches, is that, you can really tell when it comes down to the process. And then the process unfolds tools, and then the tools can help you kind of get to a point. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that, but, for me, very quickly, we went through a little bit of a battery of my background and kind of an actualized leader profile. You can help talk about that too. But in the same time, I'm going through Senate confirmation. You're trying to help me prepare for a job I may not get. And so also you had a lot of connections here in DC. And, I did a lot of work in DC when I was a mayor of a city, when we would come and lobby for water infrastructure projects, trying to bring money back home. But, never really was focused on lobbying for myself to try and get through a Senate confirmation. And so you're very knowledgeable, your husband, great reputation, a lot of connections. And it's just, I think for the listeners, what I'm hoping to be able to give them and through this discussion is, sometimes you got to leverage all the capability you can to get the most out of a situation, realize you can't do it by yourself. And that's my perspective when we got together. I don't know if you want to add anything before we kind of get into this.
Well, and I just really enjoyed meeting you. And you may remember I started out my career at the Office of Chief Counsel at the IRS, which means I was either very popular or very much loathed, in late March, early April.
That's right.
But I also believe in government service. And I think your perspective on knowing yourself well enough to know that, hey, this feels like I'm venturing someplace that I haven't been before, but there are other people who have, so not being the Lone Ranger and asking for help, asking for perspective. I think we all come at problem solving with sort of thinking, or most of us do, I don't want to use always, never, or everyone, but come at a problem thinking that we're seeing things like totally objectively, or we're seeing everything. And, it's the really wise person that's able to see that that there's something missing. They know they're missing something, and then looking for the resources,
Yeah. Well, and what I think would be interesting is, a little bit of your background and kind of getting you to this position of being an executive coach, I think is very interesting, because I think it really kind of helped give a perspective that you wouldn't normally see. And we're talking a little bit about your legal background, but if you wouldn't mind for the listeners, just to give a little bit of profile of your background and
Sure.
where we're at today.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the first time I went to law school was in 1972. So it doesn't mean that I'm 112. It means that I went with my mother. So my mother was one of the first women that went to law school in the country, and that first wave of women coming out of the 60s, had already, had children, obviously. And she, she wanted to create a career for herself. And my father was incredibly supportive. So actually that's been really important to me as just sort of, kind of my perception. My father put my mother through law school, my sister and I, he's a lawyer, he put my sister and I through law school. So there was always an expectation growing up that I could do whatever I wanted to do, even though I was a woman. So no chauvinism or anything like that coming anywhere from my family, and really just the expectation that I could do whatever I wanted to do. So I remember going to my mom's corporate law class and seeing, taking notes with my crayons, which I'm not sure was completely appreciated by the professor, but it was what it was. And then I did go to law school for myself at the University of Michigan after I completed my master in public policy, also from what's now the Ford Institute of Public Policy Studies. And then I've got my, professional coaching certification through the ICF.
Can you talk about your transition from law to executive coaching?
So I joke around that I spent 11 long years as a tax lawyer. and in fact, my husband jokes around when he looks at pictures from right before I retired from that to after, that I look better. I looked better 12 years later and he looked worse. Which actually touches on something that's really important to me, and that is, like, life's too short. You've got to love what you do. And I actually love working hard, and I love the work that I do. So being a tax lawyer, the part about that was fun for me is solving hard problems. So I didn't fill out tax returns, thankfully. You wouldn't want me to do that. But, wrestling with the issues for, Fortune 500 clients, helping a friend out every once in a while. But the people aspect of it, it just wasn't feeding my soul. So I actually started to get migraines. So it's like my body was telling me, this is not working for you. And I decided I'd pay attention, and started to work with an executive coach, someone who I'd known for a very long time, who also made the same transition. So we were sort of simpatico in that sense, and got really, really interested in understanding how people are hardwired differently. So I got Myers-Briggs certified because I wanted to figure out what was wrong with me that I didn't love being a tax lawyer. So as silly as that sounds, and with over 20 years in retrospect. But that was part of the transition. And then she suggested, you might be interested in coaching. And I started to experiment with it. And I realized that I was really good at helping people to gain insight from themselves by using the framework of an assessment tool. And that's why we use assessment tools in our work.
Yeah, I think that's where, when we first started going through a process with me, I took the test and to really kind of get an idea. And I guess I would just share too with the listeners, because this next section of just being able to talk about, what is executive coaching and assessment. But I would say from a client perspective of going through that, what I thought was very interesting is I'm a data-driven person. I'm an ENTF and Myers-Briggs. My
ENTJ.
ENTJ. Yeah, you're right. And so what has been hard for me is, like, for me, if there's not a process and data to kind of get me back on track, but through those types of assessments, I also realized where my weak spots were and how I am designed to deal with them, just at default, and maybe what I should consider doing. And so talk a little bit about, being an executive coach. What is that? When listeners listen to that, sometimes people that haven't had that type of help, maybe from your perspective, what types of people get involved with you?
Yeah. So first of all, my business name is Arudia, and it's the combination of Latin words to teach and to support. So that's really my coaching perspective. My coaching is not supposed to be about telling you what you can do, but helping you to see some insight. And my way of coaching is to, all right, we have this framework that we're looking at. Geez, Troy, do you think it could be this? And then, you look inside and you say, yeah, you know what, I think you're right. Let's brainstorm now about how you can approach this particular challenge differently. So clients that come to me, I work with a lot of CEOs. I have a niche with lawyers, obviously, because I understand lawyers and law firm, married to one. I do have friends that aren't lawyers, you, for example. But also have a niche in community behavioral health. With associations, in Washington, D.C., there are all sorts of really, really interesting people to work with. But the ideal client for me is someone who is ambitious, who wants to accomplish a lot, and who's willing to look at themselves, not in a way of self-criticism, but kind of I'm missing a little bit of something here, or I'm in uncharted waters, just as you said, and need a little bit of help navigating. And also just the digging into, who am I as a leader? Let me get some clarity on what I do really well, which, that's kind of our hard wiring going forward. But the key is to recognize when our hard wiring isn't exactly serving us. And without the framework of perspective, it's hard to make a choice to do something differently. So for example, an ENTJ might have a hard time just letting things ride for a little while and play out. I notice you're smiling there, so that's how that resonates. I'm also married to an ENTJ, so I've lived with this for a long time. And so to recognize that about yourself and say, you know what, this is not what I would want to do, but it's the right thing to do here. And those are the truly great leaders. In fact, the best leaders that I work with, or the people who are the best leaders, are people that I kind of have a hard time telling, like, what is this person's Myers-Briggs type? Who are they as an actualized leader? What's their profile look like? Because they're so good at doing whatever is needed in the moment that you just can't tell, because they don't have sort of the hallmark, faults or missteps of their type. So those, but you have to be willing to not confront bad things, but to kind of be a little bit uneasy about trying out some new behaviors that will serve you better. And some of the feedback that I've gotten from clients is that I'm really good not only at reading them, but my goal is to help them to be successful. So not pushing them off a cliff in terms of using a new skill, but figuring out ways to get them to try it out where it feels safe, so that they can really develop it. Just like, you go to the gym, you don't start benching 500 pounds.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I was in El Paso a couple of weeks ago with some of my colleagues from IBM, and one of my colleagues was saying that they had gotten some pretty significant golf coaching. But this person is a pretty good golfer. And when it came time, I think that got up in the head and it wasn't natural, and it kind of threw things off. So executive coaching, I think for me too, I always tell people, I listen to you, I process, I try to reconcile, but at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and it's got to be natural for me.
Exactly.
And I can just change my naturalness a little bit more because I'm sensitive to it. But I think that's the one thing that you can help me kind of unlock there was what I'll call like the negative patterns that I would have in communication, or just like I said, in the blind spots of being able to try to figure out these things catch up to you, and when they catch up to you, there's ways to unlock it. I don't think it was you that said this, but I remember actually looking at the actualized leader thing and thinking, how can I develop tricks? Or in wrestling, one of my sons watches WWF wrestling, right? And then it's all fake, but there's always these tricks to get out of the moves, and
right.
And so I always like, do I know that, do I got a trick here that I can kind of pull? And it's data and the way that you present it, I think it was definitely helpful. The shadow zone. Can you talk a little bit about the shadow?
Yeah. And actually, I want to go back to something that really struck me when you introduced me to your team when you were CFO at DHS, is that you really appreciated my analytical approach. So even though I'm not hardwired to be a tax lawyer, I've still got all that training. I was an economics major, master's in public policy, statistics, econometrics, and then law school, and took all business courses. But yeah, the key is to recognize it, because if you can't see it, it's got you. So when you talk about the shadow side, it's basically when we're acting out of fear. So it's fear-based, it comes from our subconscious, and it's fueled by negative emotions like fear, anxiety, jealousy, that kind of thing. So if you think about somebody, if you've ever had a manager that micromanages you, and this is the biggest pet peeve in our leadership academy when we do our polling. Nobody wants to be micromanaged, but it's because that leader or that manager is stressed out about it not being done right. And so the shadow behavior is micromanaging. So that good attention to detail becomes that negative shadow side. But going back to your question, if you don't recognize it and recognize what it looks like or what it feels like as you're, I like to say, stepping into your shadow, because then it implies naturally that you can step out of it, you can't stop it, because when you're in the middle of it, the whammy of it is it all feels real. Like, think about impatience. Like, impatience really is its own punishment, right? When we're impatient, we're standing in the line at the DMV trying to get everything done, and we're worried about making our meeting. We keep looking at our watch. We kind of are, pushing people. We're edging up. We're doing whatever it is. Our heads are about to explode. None of that helps, right? And so the point is to recognize that like as a leader, you're chafing against your lack of control. And so then to try to go back and figure out like, all right, what do I need to control, or what do we need to do as a team to be able to get this done right, rather than being caught up in the emotion and the negative thinking and the negative behavior of it.
Right. Yeah. No, the one thing that you did when we were at DHS, you came in as obviously a huge organization. And, something I would say to listeners, if you're a manager of one person, or you don't manage, or you manage a whole organization, the ability to get everybody to see each other in a safe way, to be able to, a lot of managers just come in and just say, hey, look, I'm going to take it from here, and I'm just going to focus on the objectives. And some of the most successful people I've seen in corporate land in my career were almost narcissists. They did not, they didn't look down. They looked up a lot, and they focused on objectives and wins. And in the 2 to 3 years that they would have in that assignment, they'd be very successful, and people loved them above. 360 scores would come back not so favorable. Attrition would be up a little bit. HR issues are up, and frustration within the ranks, but leadership did not value that enough down to the low enough level to where they reinforced good behavior by a top executive. And so I know from what I try to get out of this process is, and I loved it at DHS, is you were able to go 2 or 3 levels deep. I think by doing that, I already knew there was value. My deputy CFO knew there was value. But I think it reaffirms to lower levels that even if the organization hasn't talked about the values, or they talk about them and they don't really mean it, it reaffirms to people at lower levels that we're serious about this. This is how we are. And you can do that if you're willing to put 5 to 10 years in an organization. But if you only know you're going to be in for a short period of time, I felt that this was invaluable to come in to really speed us through that process in a very dogmatic way that got this going. And really quickly, also, I think there had to be a trust that, like, once you get pegged on the scale, wherever you're at, that I wouldn't use that against you. I'm not manipulative. I'm really, and I think there was that overcoming that at the lower levels. That was some of the feedback that I got outside of you being in there, was like, once I'm pegged here, am I in a corner? Or, have I been like, will I be marginalized? Just work around me. Right. And so, it was but you know what? That would have had to work itself out over 5 to 10 years by behavioral actions, some positive and slow motion. And you sped it up, like, within a month or two, to get to having a real discussion of, are you marginalizing me, versus passive aggressively, are you marginalizing me? And so I just really enjoyed that. What I wanted to talk a little bit is kind of shift into, like, what I'll call the Arudia approach, that you kind of bring in. People use coaches in different ways, but if you're just sitting as somebody out there listening to this, and you're going to try to either make yourself better or your organization, can you talk about the process or the approach that you do come in? Because we've talked about it in pieces, but maybe just in a little bit more coaching.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of things. One is I want to make sure that the ethics of any assessments that you do when you work with a group are, you don't share assessment results. So that was another thing that we did, and we made sure that we highlighted. And also, you didn't participate in the training so that people could have their own trainings.
That's right.
So I just want to, kind of, give you credit for that, as well as, just you voiced the need to invest in leadership and management. And I think in my experience in doing this for 20 years, that's really important, that people feel invested in, and in particular, the millennials and the Gen Z who are now really getting into the workforce. That's important. And we can go back and talk about retention in a minute.
Sure.
But in terms of the approach, so I always have it's all about getting the results that the client wants, right? So when I have an initial chemistry call, or whatever you want to talk about, however you want to describe it with a client, I want to hear, what do they want to get out of coaching? Mm-hmm. It's never one size fits all, even though I have an approach. My approach is designed to be very flexible and really help the client meet the goals that they have set for themselves. And also, I will say, help them to even think bigger about what they're capable of. I work with some just absolutely amazing people, and kind of being able to see them see their own greatness and ability to contribute, whether it's in public service or corporate or nonprofit, is just one of the best experiences as a coach. So I have the client complete an intake package because I want the very first session to be really impactful. So I want to get to know them. All of this is confidential. They take 3 assessments. So if I know their Myers-Briggs type, their actualized leader profile, and their problem-solving style via the Curtin Adaptation Innovation Inventory, I have a huge sense of this is this person's strengths. I already probably have some guesses about this after I've talked to them. These are their strengths. Here's where their challenges are. They've complained about or they want to resolve some sort of challenge. And okay, here's what's going on. Here's how they're looking at it through their lens of their particular problem-solving style, for example. So there's the assessments that create this framework for understanding yourself and understanding others. All of this towards a view of being able to stay in problem-solving mode rather than being in your shadow, getting frustrated, taking things personally, becoming impatient, micromanaging. So really being the kind of leader that everybody aspires to be, that everybody wants to work for. And then there are, of course, the tools. So we spend a lot of time teaching, and I say we because I have a small team. My COO is also an excellent coach, and she coaches a number of our clients as well. We team some of that. But we teach them coaching skills. So how to use coaching to basically nurture others' best thinking, how to improve collaboration. You know, so if you and I are wired totally differently, and we're almost the exact opposite, so we are, and and so we come at approaches differently. Like I stay in that place of curiosity and ask those really targeted questions, both as a professional coach, but then also as a colleague. That's how you get the best results. And then the win-win conversation model, which is really about eschewing blame, defensiveness, and then there's a lot of other things there as well. We also, and I'll just mention, we have our Leadership and Management Academy, where we wrap all of that up into 10 and a half hours of core training and then a whole year's worth of webinars after that, because our goal is to be able to provide a sustainable and cost-effective means of helping leaders such as yourself transform culture. So you've got to be able to scale it, because I can't teach somebody how to do what I do in like 5 days and then set them loose on your organization. Although I have toyed with the idea of some train the trainer.
Yeah, well, in the technology world that I live in, train the trainer and all of the new tools that are out there. But I think over and above I think it takes a certain personality type and and a certain level of experience that's hard to find to get, especially if you're dealing with senior executives, because we're probably the most skeptical and critical. Yep. And we're in the same way, you're asking the right questions. We're like omnidirectionally evaluating everything to see if this is worth our investment.
Exactly. Well, and that's where being a lawyer has really helped me. Not because I'm trying to persuade, but just that having developed, not seeing things as conflict. Actually, this comes up a lot where people see certain interactions as conflict. And if you can transform that mindset, so this is a place, for example, of where coaching is really valuable to, hey, we're just kind of debating this back and forth because we're trying to figure it out. We're not arguing. You're not mad at me. That is a typical issue. But yeah, so I don't really take anything personally because it's all about the client too. That's the other thing.
Kind of getting ready, even though I knew a lot about you, I was doing a little bit of research. And, one of the things that you talked about that I thought would be nice to share before we get to the close here is that, how excited you get when your clients have that moment to realize, because I think, you definitely have talked about that. And would you mind sharing that?
Yeah. So, all right. So again, like just what I said, it's all about the client. So when you have a client have an insight about themselves or about a situation that is transformational, it's like you've just lifted the weight of the world off their shoulders and they're like excited. They are energized. And there's nothing better than that for me. I mean, if I was really I could have been a tax lawyer. I decided that was not my path. This really is my path, because for me, it's all about the people. It's all about helping them, my clients, get what they want for themselves, for their teams, for their organizations, because everybody wants to work in a great culture, right?
That's right. And, leaders that are humble enough to say, hey, I need help. This is something that, and I don't know, from today, for the last 5 years, I'd say definitely people at my level and above, it seems to be much more open to this, and it seems to be much more acceptable. Maybe 5 to 10, 15 years before that, I would go into the top of Fortune 500 executives working a lot with their CFO and CIO, and we would come across challenges in their organization, and they were like, the CFO or CIO would look at me and go, hey, Troy, I got this. We're going to get so-and-so an executive coach. And that was like a form of, we're going to get them on board. And, it almost sounded like waterboarding to me.
Yeah.
But and so, it was like you send in the help when you got an incorrigible. But, I think now people are realizing, and I do feel firms, I'm at a Fortune 500 firm, I really, down deep in my heart, feel like they really do want you to be your very best. And
they do.
And they realize, like, getting out there not only on their time, but on your own time, and trying to get out and make yourself eminent, educate yourself. So it's a very positive time period, I think, as an executive.
Yeah. And 20 years ago when I started, it was, the problem clients,
Mm-hmm.
the people who were a problem. And I will say half the time the problem was really their manager, but that's like a whole nother podcast. Yeah. I think we're really at a point where it's investment. In the people. Because an organization, yes, there are buildings, there are computers, there are all these other things, but it's really about the people in the team. When you have a great team, you've got a lot of productivity, efficiency. People are excited about coming to work. Right. And this is where retention is really important. The leaders are the single most important aspect of culture. Because if you have a leader that doesn't tolerate poor behavior, that can speak candidly about problems, that's objective, that is clear about their priorities, you've got an organization that can function, and where people raise their concerns, and where they contribute freely, even their kind of crazy ideas, which may lead to something that's really awesome.
Yeah. And as we get ready to close, I just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity. For me, this discussion's been very helpful. I think a lot of people probably are listening to this that haven't had that type of help, and maybe this will give them a perspective. Everybody's approach as a coach probably might be different. You and I gravitate towards each other because I am a data structure process type of person. So I maybe not the touchy-feely hugs and all that. I love all that too, but that's not what I would be looking for in my coach. But any insight, any closing points you'd like to leave with the audience today?
Yeah, I think have the courage to invest in yourself. That's what I would say. You're and if you're unhappy at all in your career or in your life in any way, there's probably something about your perspective, or maybe the job just isn't a fit. That's the other thing. I just recently wrote an article with a friend on maintaining your confidence, like during a layoff. All sorts of things happen, and we're so, we feel a sense of shame and everything, and it's really just about figuring out, like, all right, I've mourned it. That was not great. Let's figure out how to move forward, because that's the only direction that you can move to, right, is to try to figure out how to move forward. And so, and explore it. There are ways of figuring out, if you're interested in coaching at all. We offer our Leadership Academy, which is a way of getting a whole year of coaching, kind of on your own schedule. It's already on your own schedule, but we do webinars, we do the core training. Mm-hmm. You get to meet people from across the country. That's always fun. Right. A big part of that actually has been a lot of validation in our leadership academies. You have people that have the same frustrations, and you realize that there's nothing wrong with you. That this is just kind of part of the human condition, and we're trying to improve the human condition.
Right. Right. Well, I really appreciate you hosting me today here at the Georgetown Club, and I'm looking forward to getting some lunch with you here in just a few minutes. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for coming. I look forward to seeing you when you're back in town.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. You have a good one. Thanks.
You too.
Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.